This feels really weird. New background, new hair, same drilling. Hello, welcome back to my channel. My name is Miranda, and today I'm going to be talking about all of the books that I read in the month of June. Yeah, it's very satisfying to me, but because I now upload every Thursday, that my June wrap-up is going to go up on the 1st of July. Once again, I'm very sorry if you can hear noises of building work. There are men's outside my flat right now putting scaffolding up, and they're like just over there. They can probably see me doing this, but that's okay because I can hear them. So if they start mouthing me off, I know, shut up. Also, this is now the third video in a row that I have worn this shirt. I promise I have other clothes. I just like this shirt. It's really nice and soft. So June has been a very weird month reading wise for me. I haven't really felt like reading, and also I haven't really felt like watching booktube videos either. So my watch later playlist is like insane right now, and I've not been massively enjoying the books that I have read for some reason. There have been lots of books that I think are good that I've read that I haven't particularly connected with, or it's just taken me ages to finish them. Anyway, we're gonna get into it. So the first two books that I finished, I talked about in my May wrap-up. Is that the month that comes before June? Yes. I talked about them in my May wrap-up because I read the majority of them in May. So firstly, I finished the audiobook of Shadow and Bone by Donoghue, which I really enjoyed. It was very fun. So I've mentioned in a couple of videos before how I wanted to read Shadow and Bone so I could watch the series, partly because it looked like it was going to be a really good adaptation, but also because Ben Barnes is in it, and apparently I'm a simp for Ben Barnes now publicly on the internet. That's the thing. He just has a very nice face, okay? So I listened to the audiobook of Shadow and Bone, and I really enjoyed it. I think it's not as good as the Six of Crows duology, which is fine. I don't think the writing is as strong, or the characters are as interesting, but I still really appreciate the world building. And I read it really quickly because I wanted to know what happened. I kind of sped through the audiobook in a few days, and it was really, really enjoyable. And then I watched the show, which has pretty much replaced like my memories of the book, and I love it. It's such a fun series, and I'm very excited for season 2. So yeah, I'm glad I read it. It was a really fun time. Not like the most groundbreaking book ever, but I really enjoyed it. Then I finished America Is Not the Heart by Elaine Castillo, which I was reading for about 3 weeks, like it was ages, and yeah, so this was a kind of like hangover from the Asian readathon that happened in May, and I really love this book, even though it took me ages to finish it. That's not a reflection on the book, it was just a reflection on how I was reading at the time, because this book is really beautiful and I love it very much. So this follows a woman called Hero, who moves from the Philippines to the US to live with some of her family there, after she's kind of been, well, she's been disowned by her parents. At the beginning you don't know why that's happened. It basically just follows her in America, getting to know like her family members and making friends and trying to find her kind of place and her people. I'm actually really glad that I spent so much time with this book because it meant that I was getting to know the characters kind of gradually over time, as they were kind of getting to know each other, which felt really lovely, and I got to spend a lot of time with them, which I really enjoyed. So by the end it did feel like, you know, I was just like hanging out with my friends. I also loved how kind of gradually you find out more about Hero's past and the past of her family, because it's the kind of book that something will happen and someone will mention something and then you'll go off on a little tangent for a bit, learning about that kind of character's history and relationships and who they are, so you get to know everyone really, really well. And I love that in books. Yeah, it's such a kind of complex group of people, and how they relate to each other is really complicated and beautiful, and it's just lovely. Also, I really loved how it mixes lots of different languages in together. So there are various different Filipino languages that the characters in this book speak to each other, and they're kind of like switching between languages is very much a part of the book, and it's not just like everything is translated for an English reader, which I really appreciated. It makes it feel a lot more genuine. And also, I didn't know this when I was going into it, but the author is openly bisexual. There are bisexual characters and a sapphic relationship in this book. So it was perfect for Pride Month as well, and I would really recommend this as just an emotional but like immersive, character-driven book about just people. Also, I talked about this in my books about loneliness video, which I will link in the description, because I go into a bit more detail there about how it's about loneliness, and I filmed that when I was reading the book. It feels like ages since I finished this, so I can't really remember all of my thoughts, but yeah, I will link that in the description. Then I read The Dictionary of Lost Words by Pip Williams, which I got as an ARC from NetGalley. It is already out, I think. I think it came out in March, but yeah, I needed to read it because it was about to expire and disappear, and I really enjoyed this. I thought it was really beautifully written, and just a lovely story. This book follows Esme, who is the fictional daughter of a lexicographer working on the original first edition of the Oxford English Dictionary, and the book spans her life from the kind of start of the dictionary being made to the end, which is like about 30-ish years. What I really loved about this is it doesn't have very much plot. It's basically just a life, and like the just kind of ups and downs and emotions of a normal life, rather than being like, here is the plot, like beginning, middle, end, which is a kind of story structure that I really love. So it spans various different kind of I guess historical moments. Like there's a lot about the women's suffrage movement, there's the First World War and the kind of like aftermath of that, and honestly the bits about the First World War, the bits set in that section, were so emotional and sad. But it's also not like just the story of Esme's life and the people around her, it's the story of the dictionary and the words that she's kind of coming across every day. So she starts off as a child like underneath the desk, underneath the table in the kind of workshop where they're deciding which words go in the dictionary and defining them, and she kind of starts off by picking up words that people have forgotten or lost, and that kind of develops as she grows up into a fascination with finding and documenting words that don't go in the dictionary, words used by women and by poor people. And I thought it was really beautifully done how you see her life through words and language, and her trying to make sense of things that happen to her and things that she sees and experiences through words, and often finding that they're not sufficient, and that kind of juxtaposition between, like, you know, language being incredibly important and trying to like preserve it in the dictionary and in her sort of like her dictionary of lost words, but then also finding that often words are not sufficient to describe what she's feeling. That's a really interesting like dynamic. And there's a lot about you know, like class and Esme's privilege as a middle-class woman who is lucky enough to be able to like you know, document the words for suffering that lower class women have to actually go through. And also that kind of feeds into discussions about the suffrage movement as well, and how it's a different movement for women of different classes. There are a couple of things that felt a little bit off to me, like the ending I thought was a bit odd, and kind of how it's paced often is a bit weird, but generally I think it's a great historical fiction novel. The way she like writes about real people, but also makes them feel not like she's just kind of relying on like research and things that they've said. Like, she makes them come alive as people, not as like historical figures. I'm not sure if that makes sense, but yeah, I thought that was really impressive, and I really enjoyed it. Then I read Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin. So this is a modern classic about a man called David, I think, who is American, living in Paris, and kind of trying to find himself, essentially. Well, actually, no, he's not trying to find himself. He's trying to run away from himself and escape his feelings, because he is a gay man in the 50s and is sort of, yeah, it's basically just about him grappling with this. But he meets a bartender called Giovanni, and they kind of start a relationship, and it's basically about what they do to each other. This was in my 5-star predictions video, and I did give it 5 stars because the way that James Baldwin like can capture a really, really complex emotion in a few words is absolutely incredible. Like, there are sentences in this that I'm like, I want this to be like tattooed on everywhere, on my face, on my walls. It's honestly so beautiful, and the emotion that he puts into this is just, it's overwhelming, to be honest. And I know that I will go back to this book and I will reread it and I will, you know, write all over it. This isn't my copy, so I couldn't write on it, which was very sad. And I will get even more from it, because I really think this is just incredible. Like, there's so much in here. It's so short. It's about 160 pages long. It is about shame and loneliness and internalized homophobia, and like exploitation of young gay men, and what it means to be American. Anyway, it's great. It's excellent. Everyone knows it's excellent. Read it. Then yesterday I finished The Antarctica of Love by Sara Stridsberg, translated by Deborah Bragan Turner, from Swedish. So this was another NetGalley arc that again was about to run out, so I had to read it, which was a real shame. I'm really sad that was the situation under which I had to read this book, because I was not in the mood for this. It wasn't like what I was feeling at all, and I kind of struggled my way through it because I wanted to finish it, which isn't great. However, I do think is a really good book in lots of ways, and I think the experience that I had with it was more my fault than the book's fault. So The Antarctica of Love is about a woman who has been brutally murdered. It's very depressing. It's incredibly depressing. Let's just put that out there first. But yeah, it's narrated from her point of view once she's dead. So she's looking back at her life, her death, like the moment of her death. But also she narrates the like continuing lives of her loved ones, so her parents and her children. She narrates their lives moving forward after she's died. Like I said, this is a very depressing book because it is about a woman who has been totally abandoned by society. She's an addict and she's a sex worker, and out of kind of desperation. So there's a lot about kind of her being abandoned and lost and not having any hope, which is obviously not the most fun to read about. The writing is really unique. It's very whimsical and very lyrical, but also it feels very real. It's really interesting how the sort of lines between life and death are blurred in that way. Like she's narrating like her memories as if she's kind of being forced to relive them, and it jumps around in time a lot, and kind of repeats things, so it feels like she's kind of stuck in certain times. Quite a lot of that is her being stuck in the moment of her death, or like the moments leading up to it. So you get that kind of memory retold from different angles and like slightly different things happening every time. And that was interesting because for me, it kind of felt like after a certain point that really lost its impact, and I was just like, yeah, I've read this before, like I know what happens. And then I realised that a lot of it is about how like sensationalized her murder was, and the fact that like it was reported on in the media and lots of people were talking about it and not really caring about who she was, and kind of like her being silent and able to be manipulated. So I feel like that kind of the repeating of her death and like the desensitization is intentional. I know that if I read this at a better time, I think I would have been more affected by it, because there were certain parts that made me incredibly emotional and I thought were really beautifully done, but other parts I just couldn't really connect with. I did like force myself to finish it because it was so dark and I wasn't having a fun time, and I was just like, I want to read something happy. Why am I reading about this person reliving her murder over and over again? I didn't enjoy it, but I think that it is good, and it has lots of interesting things to say, and I'm really interested for other people to read it when it comes out, which I think is the end of September, and yeah, I really want to know other people's thoughts. So lastly, we have a book that I finished this morning, because I realised that I had to film this today, and I was like, I need to finish this book so I can include it, and that is Kissing the Witch by Emma Donoghue. So this is a collection of short stories. It is basically fairy tales retold with certain twists. So although certain stories are very much recognisable as, like, you know, Beauty and the Beast or Snow White or The Little Mermaid, they are like very different from in like their setting and the kind of like just the way that they're told. All of these stories are written really beautifully, and they feel very natural and also very kind of timeless, like you would hear them around a campfire. However, I think I would have liked more kind of subversion, and for her to do more interesting things with the stories, because of a lot of the time it was like, okay, we're making a change to this story, but it doesn't, it just makes it into a slightly different story and doesn't actually like say much. So I kind of just wanted it to go a bit further, even though I really enjoyed it. I think my favourite stories were the last like 3 or 4, especially the last 2 I really loved, and which is interesting because normally the best ones come at the beginning. One thing I did really like was that they are all interlinked. They're all told by different women, so they're narrated by a woman, and then at the end that the woman narrating will ask another woman from that story, who were you before you were part of my story, and then she tells her story, and it kind of goes on like that. I love that because even though the stories were very interlinked, they were also very distinct and felt like this was the woman's own story, but also only part of it. And I think that was what was interesting to me most, was that even though they felt like fully rounded stories, you could tell that you weren't getting everything. And I liked how it felt that the women were choosing which parts of their lives were going to be their story. I'm not sure if that makes any sense whatsoever, but basically I enjoyed it, but I wanted a bit more. There you go. So that was all the books that I read in June. I have a feeling that this video is going to be quite long because I've rambled a lot, so I'm sorry. Thank you for making it to the end. My current TBR as of today, as I'm uploading this, is this number. Woohoo! Isn't it beautiful? A great number. Also, I always forget to say this, but I have listed and linked all the books that I mentioned down in the description for you to peruse at your pleasure, because I'm now a bookshop.org affiliate, because I set that up because I'm fancy. So if you feel like supporting me and my rambling, feel free to buy through my links. Yeah, but also if you don't wanna, and if you don't like that, that's fine. You can also not do that. It's up to you. Anyway, this has been a weird rambly video. Thank you very much for watching, and hopefully I will see you in the near future. I don't know what this arm is. We're doing weird arms now, apparently. Bye.